As most of you already know, the discussions have been recorded and they are already published and posted in the site, the Jandit site.
No, no. Okay. Thank you. Hello. Good evening. Good evening, Professor Antonio, friends. Good evening.
Good evening, Professor.
This, sorry, this usual kind of technical problems, but I think we are ready to go, aren't we?
Yeah.
Is Victor around?
Yes, Professor, I'm here. I'll share my screen.
Hi, Victor.
Okay.
You are more important than I am because you have the screen. Thank you, Victor. Thank you. Okay, Professor Antonio, I saw Professor Wilson somewhere. Is he here? Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, colleagues and friends. This is the fifth lecture, and I asked if Victor could please share with us the screen. Yeah, there we are. So this is the fifth lecture in the series. If you can move up, please, Victor. And basically, as the last lecture, and as it happens, I'll be in Geneva on Friday. I have to leave for Geneva if I get a visa. It's because we're having the CFA session for October to coincide with the governing body, but it's going to be virtual, so it's a bit tricky. So they are asking the chairs of the supervisory committees to be there where they can be given technical support, because it will be 4 hours a day coordinating different time zones. Is going to be very, very difficult. So I have to go to Geneva on Friday. So I'm glad that this will be, sort of, we have managed to get the 5 lectures together that Professor Antonio kindly asked me to share with you, and I can't be thankful enough for the opportunity. So this is simply a wrap up, and my intention is to reflect on the contemporary and prospective developments, sort of taking account of what the past experience has been and the implications for freedom of association. And also, I suppose one could say the ILO's mandate and mission in the second century. So this is the idea of looking at what has happened in terms of when it started, as we have seen, what the current changes are, and what the prospects for the future of work are. So I'm going to sort of to reflect, as you see, on various areas of that, but also always trying to tie it to what it means for freedom of association and collective bargaining. Next one, Victor, please. Now, if we review what we dealt with last time, you recall that we looked at the beginnings of the ILO, the historical context, and the mandate, how the mandate and mission came to be. And we also looked specifically, you remember, at freedom of association, what its basic principles, the structures, and procedures are. And in the third lecture, you recall, we looked at the global and regional impact, had a bit on Brazil and the rest of Latin America. And then last week, we looked at the linkages between freedom of association and democracy. Next one, Victor, please. Now, What I now want us to look at, and please ask questions as always, and any comments are welcome. This is not going to be a very long lecture, so we do have time. And basically what we want to do here is look at the so-called rules of the game. And these rules of the game, as I've suggested once or twice, have not only changed in some respect, but they are changing in a lot of ways. As I indicated, the old consensus, you remember the multilateral system, I think in some ways it has broken down. At best, I think it's in a flux. It's not really as firm as it used to be. And yet, I think many scholars and policymakers now argue that uh, more than ever before, the core mission of the ILO, that is one of advancing social justice in an era where there are more vulnerable people, poverty has increased, and not to mention the pandemic that has also kind of uh, this havoc. The mission of the ILO is more needed than ever before. It's more relevant than ever before. As we saw globalization, which for some time, at least among proponents of globalization, held to deliver the promise. What we know, both from the ILO studies, you remember the 2008 Commission, World Commission on the Social Dimensions of Globalization, they found that globalization really hasn't delivered on its promise, at least not in terms of reducing poverty or sort of uh, making sure that the there are more resources available throughout the world. In fact, the figures, as we saw, I think in the second lecture, are rather frightening. And in fact, the struggle, if you may put it that way, for social justice, and we are talking here for basic labor rights and democracy, definitely for freedom of association, that really hasn't been overcome. The deficit has been fueled by conflict, of course, as we know, increasing conflict everywhere, migration, hunger, and as if that were not enough, climate change, which we are struggling with. So far from sort of being promising, far from sort of being underlying or enforcing the efforts that the ILO had undertaken, as of now, I think we can say that the changes have not delivered. The difficulties in the delivery of the mission on social justice still remain, and in some cases, they have increased. The next one, please, Victor. Now, what are we seeing then is in terms of the impact of these changes on the social mission, the social justice and workplace changes. Is this the end of history? And by that rhetorical question, I mean, is this the end of the ILO mission? And this is, in fact, what the ILO itself has been struggling with, as I mentioned, I think earlier, to try and not only renew its mission, but at least convince the world that their mission they are still relevant. And we are talking here, as I said, first with a schism that has followed the breakdown in the old multilateral kind of understanding. So what we have here in terms of the far-reaching and profound rapid changes that have been and are still underway do have implications for the mission of the ILO, definitely for freedom of association and collective bargaining in particular, as we shall see. And these have been compounded by I think the fundamental, as I mentioned in passing, in terms of the difficulties that we come across on the Committee on Freedom of Association in contending with the differences. I think these are deep-seated ideological differences between the Western conception of freedom of association, which has influenced the greater part of the globe, and then of course the socialist or communist conceptions of freedom of association. As I mentioned, if you talk to Cuba and China, they will tell you they strongly believe in freedom of association. And yet there's a fundamental difference, it seems to me, between their conception and the conception of the status quo. And when I say the status quo, which is the ILO approach. The ILO approach, I think, in terms of conception, I think it can be said without any doubt that sort of it aligns itself with the plural democracy. In terms of social justice, there may be underlying similarities, of course, in delivering social justice. And when we talk of social justice, we talk of equality, we talk of sort of doing away with hunger, we talk of enabling people to have basic rights at work. Those underlying what might be the same, but their interpretation are fundamentally different between what the socialist camp and the status quo that the ILO follows understand them to be. There's also, I think, a sort of a standoff, which I referred to in passing, within the International Labor Standards Supervisory Mechanism itself. And this is within the ILO tripartite alliance or structure, if you like. I mentioned that at least to a certain extent, in some of the employer circles, they think that it's time the whole system was the sort of reverse, the pendulum, which they call that the pendulum has swung too far in favor of the workers, that they need to sort of to reclaim the balance, and this is the argument, the balance that was always intended between the tripartite structures. And of course, beyond that, as I mentioned again, there is a feeling that in a world, and we are going to see what the implications of the changes are, where the social partners are not the exclusive stakeholders in prosperity or in the way, sort of in social justice, not to mention in employment and work, that maybe they should be thinking about extending beyond the tripartite structures, which is unduly restricting in terms of the stakeholders in society. Next, please. Now, and again, it cannot be overemphasized that the work organization from the Fordist model, which you are all familiar with, this is the arrival of the assembly line that sort of enabled manufacturing, I think, to proceed to a pace and a mass scale that sort of changed the whole economic enterprise. The world now, the assumptions of the ILO itself, we saw that the ILO assumed that sort of the ILO kind of foundations assumed that this would be the model to which the world would always be. But of course, as we have seen, the era of big employers, the era of big workplaces is no longer the norm. It is more or less an exception, even in sort of industrialized countries of the South, like Brazil, that you do see it. I think you still have a lot of, my impression is that you still have a lot of big companies and all that, but the informal economy is catching up with everybody globally, particularly in the developing world. And Africa, for this purpose, is a proxy of the broader and widespread kind of developments where the formal sector is shrinking and the informal economy is blossoming. And the problem then, in terms of the implications for the ILO, is that when we are talking about freedom of association, when we are talking about collective bargaining, we are essentially, sort of dealing with the assumption that there are going to be these workplaces where, these can be organized and then the rights sort of enjoyed. I should hasten to add, and the ILO would argue, that the shrinkage or the sort of the decline in the formal sector does not mean that the basic decent work labor rights go out of the window. I think they argue that the idea of decent work, including collective bargaining and freedom of association, have to be pursued wherever work takes place. That is, I think, easier said than done. How do you translate labor rights in a situation where most people are self-employed? Okay, it can be granted that if you look at the very well-to-do self-employed people, they're always more often than not, they do have people work for them. It could be family, it could be sort of, other people as well. So the ILO argument is that wherever work takes place, that work must be dignified. It must observe normal labor rights, that is sort of be able to earn as much as possible, be able to be safe, and be able to be to sort of to not to overwork people in terms of working hours and so forth. And but the norm, as I keep saying, of informality is here to stay, and the shift in most African countries, sub-Saharan countries, and I give that example. If you take the Southern African sub-region, most of the countries here, the formal sector is less than 10%. Now, the dilemma is this, that, even though it's less than 10%, a lot of these countries depend on that 10% to earn a living in the world. Why? Because of the commodities. That's where the commodities are. If you take Botswana, Zimbabwe, Zambia, it's the commodities that sort of pay for their balance of payments. But in terms of employment, that's not the story. In terms of the social protection, in terms of social justice, we are dealing here with an elite. A 10%, in fact, are the elite. In terms of sort of formal employment is not there. This 10% may, as it does, earn these countries a living, but it doesn't deliver the goods, so to speak, for the citizens. It doesn't deliver at all. And when you talk of sort of this phenomenon, as the ILO originally did, and they're still, in my view, it's unfortunate. I think there are people still in the ILO who think that this phenomenon of informality is reversible. I don't know about you in Brazil, but in where I'm sitting, I'm sitting in a country that is the biggest industrial economy in Africa, by far. And it's sort of, it's got here an advanced first world. It's got, the middle world, and sort of, but the majority, 60%, are still outside the formal sector. And it's increasing. That 40% is decreasing. Now, how you can ever think that this phenomena is ever going to be reversed? And when you talk about reversing, what are you talking about? Are you talking about sort of suddenly making the informal sector, the person kind of repairing sort of the this and that on the roadside, suddenly going back to a big factory where they can do that. They got to that because the big factory disappeared. How you reinstate that? If that is your definition of reversing the phenomena, I don't think it's realistic. Next word, please, Victor.
So, Professor Evance,
yes.
Do you believe that these tendencies are not reversible?
I think so. I'm not an economist, but I think so. To everybody I talk to, and now, in fact, there are arguments within the ILO that are saying that's not the point. The point is not reversing the trend. The point is ensuring, as I mentioned before, that there's some semblance of decent work. Laborize that people are not overweight, that maybe they are paid as decent work, decent wages as much as possible, rather than sort of thinking that you are going to go back to this Fordist era. That is definitely not going to happen unless, Professor Antonio, somebody might be saying, okay, you can leapfrog that. You don't have to go from informality through the old Fordist era. You can go from there right to innovation and the fourth industrial revolution. Is that possible? On a massive scale, it may happen. In terms, there have been, I'm sure in Brazil there must have been more cases. There have been occasional cases here where somebody, like the example I can give you, there's been a clever individual here with no basic education, no formal education. He found a way of sort of bypassing the big kind of apps and setting up something that was able to communicate to between people. And then, of course, the big network stole this from him, and he took them to court. And in fact, now they are busy trying to reverse all that, and the company MTN resisting. Now and again, you have people like that who are gifted and who leap from the informal to the right to the top. But I don't think you are going to have most people doing that. You always have talented people in all societies, isolated. And even if you had, Professor Antonio, look at the kind of backup. If you take small business, for instance, of the countries I know, only China has been able to provide the kind of support to small business, but that is by the regimentation, to small business. None, in this country for the last 30 years, since the almost 30 years, they have been talking about, turning the tide to support small business. It remains more of, sort of on paper than in reality. The small business is still kind of not well supported. They, particularly now, most of them are out. 51%, they represent part of that 51% of the economy that has shrunk in the last quarter. So to think that somehow you can reverse this decline, I'm very doubtful. But as I keep saying, I'm not an economist. Can we do it by law? In terms of maybe provide a wonderful legal framework that is going to allow the policymakers to do that. But even if we did, I couldn't see how that could happen so easily.
Unfortunately, I agree with you entirely.
Yes, yeah. So, but I suppose one has got to say, look, it doesn't mean that you can't benefit from the new innovation if you are able to gather the momentum and grow it meaningfully. Then that will probably help in lessening not so much the informal sector, but the negative impact of the informal sector. And if you look at that, as I keep repeatedly saying, freedom of association and decent work, these are still the driving forces of the ILO. And now we must ask ourselves, in the face of this continuing decline of the formal sector, aren't we going to see further decline in trade union rights with implications for freedom of association and collective bargaining? Are there any ways of the unions, for instance, organizing not only in their declining little workplaces, but beyond that? And if they are, what does that mean for the ILO centerpiece of tripartite engagement? If, for instance, you are going to, and here I don't know about Brazil, here you do have a union of the unemployed. They are a registered union. I haven't, what they do exactly is more or less like a pressure group, an NGO trying to to put pressure on the policymakers and the enterprise to create more jobs. And the interesting thing, Professor Antonio, is that their approach tends to clash head on with those of organized labor. Because more often than not, I don't know about Brazil, but there is this conversation that a lack of work is due to the trade union agitation, trying to organize people in the workplace and raise the wages beyond what is affordable, and therefore less people are employed. That's the argument that they put on the table. So if you have this system increasing, again coming back, how are we going to enhance freedom of association and collective bargaining in such a situation? And of course, now you have got innovation, virtual forms of work as we are doing now. These are also implicated in the decline of the traditional forms of work and organization. So the more you innovate, the more you take on board other ways of working, the more I think the traditional workplace is going to decline, and with it, collective bargaining and freedom of association. And we are talking now, of course, of freedom of association in the work sense, because freedom of association, as you know, is wider. There is a political, side of freedom of association where people are free to associate politically and, in fact, enhance democracy. But we are talking of workplace freedom of association here. So how will it fare in this changed world? Next, please, Victor. So what is, I think, concerning, actually, it's not being, alarming, just wanting to be alarming, but if you look at what we have now, I think it's rather frightening. The future of work, the Global Commission, which reported on the future of work, it reported back in 2018, had a very chilling message on the current stability of skills and education outcome worldwide. Basically, what he was saying, that increasingly people do not have the necessary skills to work in the future. There's a massive skills deficit, which is compounded by the wrong type of education. And I'll just give you an example of South Africa, which I think you may not have in Brazil. In South Africa, there is massive unemployment. At least the true figure is about 40%. Okay, the official figure is about 25. But I think that includes, that excludes the discouraged and all. You know how they define who is unemployed and all. So of those 40% are unemployed. And yet, South Africa is grossly short of skills that are needed in the economy. There are not enough engineers. There are not, enough kind of doctors, health workers. In all areas, there's a skills deficit. And yet, if you look at South Africa, the level of participation, the population's participation in education is not very high. It ranges it depends on from what population group. If in the African Black group, it's less than 12% in terms of, participating in education. And it goes up to about 30, even for the white group. So if you compare that, and it's not with Japan or Sweden, and the most successful countries, they say, are countries that have a very high participation of the population in the educational system. But that is not enough. We have 21 universities in South Africa. And among the unemployed, increasingly, they are graduates. And here, it doesn't make sense. Why? I mean, to the employer says it makes sense because the people you are producing them from academic enterprise, not what we want. And they are by the way, very reluctant to take on the responsibility of retraining, because a lot of these people, it's not for the lack of the propensity to be trained. These are, sort of well-educated people that could be trained, but for them, it's a cost. So you don't have that kind of approach that ensures that, first of all, you produce the kind of skills that you need, and secondly, that you can retrain people on the job if need be. So there's a massive skills deficit, and many workers, they lack productive skills and relevant to the fourth industrial revolution. So obviously what the commission report was saying, that the world would need massive retooling, upskilling of the existing workers to start with. That educational policy closely inadequate. There's a mismatch between what the educational system produces and what the economy produces. There are also huge shortfalls in employment, in jobs, because of lack of adequate skills for the innovation needed. Remember, I think we must always remind ourselves that when we talk of the fourth industrial revolution, what is key to it is innovation. And that innovation means that, you've got to have the kind of skills or the kind of policies that encourage innovation. And if you look at the figures, the Global Commission estimated that 344 million jobs would be needed by 2030, hardly 10 years from now. You have to find 344 million jobs. And that, if you go up, Victor, please. And that would be in addition with the shortfall that we are facing now, which is about 190 million plus in terms of the jobs that are needed now. And to make matters worse, the majority, those that are unemployed and are young, we are talking about 64.8 million of those. And of those that are working, and these are measures, these are UN kind of measures, you have 300 million people that can be classified as the working poor, and that is they subsist on less than $1.90 a day, and the workplace sort of insecurity continues. 278 million work-related accidents and illnesses. The norm in terms of the working hours, they are excessive, with the 36.1% working more than what could be regarded as the acceptable norm, that is the 48-hour per week sort of norm, hours a week. And of course, there has been a decline in the real growth of wages in the last decade. The next one, please. So as if that were not enough, inequality continues to increase. 1% of the richest receive 27% of the global income. In comparison, 50% of the poorest receive only 12% of the global income. Similarly, and this is for the future, the exposure to digital exposure, which is crucial in the era of renovation, is very, very low, particularly in Africa. And even in South Africa, which is regarded as a global emerging economy, only 15% really are exposed to digital ways. So there you have, again, you have got a mismatch between innovation and transition to the digital age. And that more or less further worsened the deficit of skills. And okay, Brazil and South Africa are deemed to be two of the most unequal societies, but we are not unique. And this is the thing. I mean, in some ways, if you look around, and this is sad, sort of South Africa and and Brazil are unequal enough, but it's not unique, and this is what really makes it even more disturbing. If you go, I mean, any country in Africa, it's amazing. If you go around, you just land at that airport and go to Lagos, for instance, which is a metropolitan kind of place. It's amazing the kind of wealth you see there, and the kind of poverty on the doorstep. And when we talk about poverty, there's nothing dignified in poverty. We are talking about basic needs, something to eat, clean water to drink, and all that. So the disparity between within society is huge, and that continues worldwide. Even in the one, I mean, if you take India, for instance, I've been to India quite a number of times. And if I compare with the other countries as well, it's unbelievable, incredible in terms of the where people are. And one thing you've got to say for India that I always say in South Africa is that for them, at least, they are, I think, like Brazil, they are very innovative people generally, in terms of, it's not for lack of ingenuity or innovation. It's just the numbers are so vast. They're just against it. Okay, China brags at the moment, and they are fond of reminding everybody that in 1963, the sort of the vital statistics in terms of how many poor people there were and what, they were not very, very different from India. And if you taking it closer to Africa, South Korea, the indications were in the 1960s were far much lower, worse than what Ghana had. And yet the Chinese, with I think sort of considerable credibility now, claim that what they have managed to do is they have brought down poverty in China. There are still quite a lot of poor people in China, millions. But, sort of in terms of the basic needs, they have managed to do that. They have managed it much better than India has. And okay, I've visited more in China than India, but I've been to India about what? Maybe 4 or 5 times in the last 20 years or so. China a bit more. And you can see if you go to rural China, there's still poverty there. But it's amazing they have narrowed it. How do you do that? Yes. How do you do that? Of course, they have done it their way, I suppose. There are consequences about it, not least from where I'm sitting, consequences about labor rights, about, sort of basic labor rights, human rights. Those are real consequences. Whether that is possible, but not even, and you see the informalization factor is not on, it doesn't spare China either. There's still a lot of migration into urban areas. And they have been trying to reverse that, the best way they know. But even them, I don't think they are reversing it completely. So these are the kind of problems that confront us as we face the future. Victor, the next one, please. So, as if that were not enough, we have got COVID. The impact, of course, South Africa and Brazil, we are in the same pot, but we are not unique. That's small, it's a very little consolation. There are drastic consequences and impact on employment. And therefore, logically, freedom of association and collective bargaining. It is, I think, little comfort that in some ways the pandemic has sort of hastened those of us who can face up to it, the future of the workplace. But compared to the havoc it has wreaked, it is really out of proportion. And it has had an unprecedented impact on employment, enterprise, and social cohesion. Cape Town, as you probably might have heard, is very hard hit with COVID. It's been higher here than, sort of the other areas are coming up. And the erosion of social cohesion is heartbreaking. Increase in crime, visible. People just, you can't cope. Never mind about sort of half the workplaces are closed. And it's unlikely for many of them that they will come back. The ILO and the UN monitors estimate a drop of 14% in working hours globally, and they estimate that this is somehow equivalent to a loss of 400 million full-time jobs. Next, please. Unbelievable, but I'm sure these figures are not far-fetched. And in fact, globally, there's been a 93% sort of workers globally have been affected by the lockdowns, which means it has I mean, we are doing this because of the lockdown. I can't go into the university right now. The only a selected few who need to be there are going to the university. And as I mentioned, the South African economy, the biggest industrial economy in Africa, has shrunk by 51% in the last quarter. But you see, COVID-19 has also disrupted social dialogue. in the workplace. And it has affected relations, definitely collective bargaining and freedom of association. As we speak, there are cases coming through. In South Africa, there have been several cases where the government has been taken to court. And this is, it will be an interesting one to dwell on. This striving for balance between health and, sort of the impact of COVID affecting people, trying to reduce its mortality rate. And then, of course, the struggle to keep workplaces open. And what the government did in Namibia, I suppose in its view, it was doing the right thing, was to say to employers that you should not retrench without involving the government and your workers. And then, of course, the employers took it to court. The president to court, and the High Court of first instance decided that was unconstitutional. The government had no power to pass any legislation that would say to an employer, where there is social dialogue and collective bargaining and freedom of association, that you should not retrench your workers until we have discussed it.
Yes.
Similar, yeah.
It was precisely the case of Brazil, where we faced a debate, a judicial debate, even in the Supreme Court about it.
Yes.
The government and even the legislative branch can pass legislation without the observance of the principle of social dialogue. And as far as I read in the Labor Law Research Network website, the United States offered the United States trade unions offered a complaint before the ILO Committee of Freedom of Association, exactly for the same.
Okay. Okay. The same kind of work. Yeah. No, that has been the case in Namibia, and in South Africa there are in fact several cases coming through where the employers, these are individuals but driven by employers to say, look, the regulation, that is the lockdown regulations, they have got no basis. They are challenging those as being excessive. So there are these kind of sort of impact on the social dialogue in the workplaces. Yeah. Next, Victor, please. So, what have been the responses? And maybe, if I may, I'm just wondering how much we will have, whether this is a good moment to have not a 10-minute, but just 5 minutes comfort break, please. Shall we have 5 minutes? Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
5 minutes break. Okay.
Hello. Hello. Hello, are we back?
Ready to start.
Okay. Victor, please, can I have the what we had, the slide we left, please? Yeah, thank you. So that is more or less, colleagues and friends, that's more or less the situation as it looked. It looks now in terms of what the setup means in the light of the changes that have taken place since the founding of the ILO and the changes that are still taking place. Now, what could be the responses to these changes and what prospects would there be in terms of what the ILO, I think, as part of the East Centenary drive, called the renewing the mission and the original mandate. Is it feasible to reverse the trend and affirm social justice to the benefit of freedom of association and collective bargaining? The ILO, needless to say, are leading the way in doing this. And as I said, to renew their mission, to reassert the importance of social justice. And in fact, some scholars, I don't know whether you are one of them, Professor Antonio, are suggesting that, you know, it's the only way the ILO can survive. That it's not, this is not simply a fight for renewal, but it's a fight for survival, to make its mission convince the sort of the global community that their mission is still relevant, not only in terms of freedom of association and collective bargaining, but in a lot of other sort of more immediate social impact in terms of their social justice.
Yes, I think we have to try to find new foundations to establish the legitimacy of social justice as a mission.
Exactly.
Not only for ILO, but for the labor law, for ILO, for
everybody. Yeah. For all those, I mean, you are right, Professor Antonio. I would suggest for that all kind of sort of, for lack of a better term, progressive kind of sort of fraternity that believe in the importance of social justice, you have to reestablish, reassert, renew in terms of what that means now. And it shouldn't depend on the old order because, you know, it's a changed situation. So they started these efforts, as I said, during the centenary, even before the centenary, initiative. In fact, they go back to 1998 when and this was under Somavia, the Chilean DG, and this is his legacy. It's a legacy. Every DG now, they like to leave a legacy, and this, I think, was, you know, Somavia's legacy. The ILO Declaration on Fundamental Principles at Work, 1998, and there was a follow-up. And then, of course, there was the one who just left. Last year in 2008, there was the Commission report on the future of work, on social justice for a fair globalization. And then last year, of course, we are dealing with the future of work. Further up, Victor, please. And of course, this culminated into the Centenary Declaration of June last year. And it's an interesting document because what it sort of it tries to do is to address a number of initiatives: decent work, the reinforcement of decent work, innovation, upskilling, and for the first time, I think, if you read through that, they attempted is to mainstream gender equity and equality, and also enhance social protection and poverty. They tried to have a work guarantee, which the employers sort of kicked out, so to speak. I mean, literally. They wanted to have an employment guarantee as part of something to strive for. So what on the recommendation of the drawing mostly on the recommendation of the Global Commission, the Centenary Declaration tries to shift incentives by pushing what it regards as human-centered business and economic model. What does that mean? It means that the innovation and the fourth industrial revolution should be human-centered, that everything that is done around that should ask the question, is this good for human solidarity? Is this good for social justice? And that we need to take responsibility to reinvigorate the social contract, renew the ILO, and renew the commitment to a multilateral system. More or less trying to overcome what we are seeing now, particularly among the bigger economies and bigger powers. That they also have what they started, I think, in 2012, what they call the International Labor Standards Review Mechanism. But this is much more of a technical kind of approach. And what the SRM tries to do is to look at the existing international labor standards to try and sort of review them and make them much more relevant in their application to current conditions. And that has meant, as I think I might have mentioned, that the supervision mechanisms themselves, and if you remember, there are three principal mechanisms. There is the International Labour Conference Committee on the application of standards. There is the the Committee on Freedom of Association, and there is a committee of experts on the application of conventions and recommendations. And those now have come under scrutiny, particularly from the employers who think that the interpretation that the committee of experts places on international labor standards is too biased towards the workers. That it is not interpreting the original intention. Very, very similar. I think you probably have this debate in Brazil. They definitely have it in the States between how you interpret the Constitution and the certain circles. Not all of them. Certain circles within the employers' circles have asserted, for instance, that there is no right to strike. That was a creation of the Committee of Experts, because there is no right to strike written in any of the founding documents of the ILO, including the Constitution and the follow-up documents. And then, of course, this is challenging a well-set precedent that the Committee of Experts, the most authoritative in terms of in legal terms in interpreting ILO norms, after the Committee of Experts, the next one is the International Court of Justice, and only by way of an advisory opinion, interpreted it that, this was a foreseen, inherent in the kind of rights that the ILO Constitution gave, and those rights in terms of freedom of association and in terms of collective bargaining, that it wouldn't make sense not to exclude, the right to strike. Otherwise, you would have no weapon to fight with, and not only for the right to strike, but as it happens, also the opposite right to lock out. And that, as you know, Professor Antonio, is another debate whether, in fact, the right to lock, there is anything as a right to lock out or not. But that was the interpretation. That this was the, it follows the rights that were given by international labor standards, including the Constitution. So that is now under challenge, and it's not part of the standard review mechanism. As I said, that is concerned about more updating and making sure that they are aligned. The conventions and recommendations are revised and are better aligned to current conditions. The next one, please, Victor. Now, I have drawn up here, and please, I would appreciate it if we could not only think about this, but as points of discussion. And the questions are, will the current ILO interventions restore the original vision and provide adequate renewal? Legal and political differences between existing ILO status quo and the socialist China and Cuba reconcilable? And what real impact can be expected from the standards review mechanism? And what impact does informality have on freedom of association and collective bargaining and trade union organization? Is it feasible to restore some common multilateral purpose, as was originally the case? And what is feasible in reskilling and employment creation to stem off massive lack of productive employment? And how feasible is the Centenary Declaration's quest for human-centered focus to innovation and enterprise? Could we have some comments, please?
May I?
Yes. Professor Wilson, yes. Yes, please.
Professor Evans, what I'm thinking is China has a very, very important role in the economic international system by now.
Yes.
And really by now, China is investing a lot of money in Brazil. And what I know is also at Africa and more than Brazil, I guess.
Yeah.
And what I'm thinking is it will be when we study about the labor market or labor relations under this big influence, and we may imagine how important China would be for this decent work agenda. And but really by now, how far or how close China is in relation with ILO? They are attracted by the ILO agenda. They are just putting away, What's your opinion about the China position by now? What I know there that they really create a labor market in China, or labor market rules on the line. And they try to improve this on the first decade of this new century, but this in a very in this speed so slow than we really need. And what do you think about China and ILO in this sense?
Yeah, well, Professor Wilson, I think first of all you are right. China is too big to be ignored, either negatively or positively. They are bound to make an impact. My sense of it is this, and you remember that we do have ongoing cases from China with the Committee on Freedom of Association. And I have reached a sense that with China, you saw there are problems there, but you can't simply sort of fob it off. They are too big to ignore. And my sense is that the best is for us to continue that conversation. There is no doubt at all, Professor Wilson, that for some reason, China is committed to the ILO. Is sort of is now funding a lot of. I think I mentioned that the ILO doesn't really have any money of its own. It depends on the partners. So up to now, it's been dependent on Scandinavia, Germany, and Japan. Now the Chinese are coming in. They are supporting the increase of the ILO budget. The last one, they supported that. And they are making it very clear. You ask me, Professor Wilson, what I think their sense of the relationship between the ILO and China. They are committed in that sense. If you look at their social mission, the social mission of the ILO, there is no doubt at all that, by what comes through, that they are committed to social justice, at least in the reduction of poverty. They are doing much better than many countries, including, sort of Western countries. The problem, however, is that their conception of labor rights is completely at odds with what the fundamental expectations of the ILO Constitution are. They only submit to the jurisdiction of the Committee on Freedom of Association because they are obliged to. They can't opt out of it. And I think it's a sticking point for them, because they come, both them and Cuba, say, look, they are committed to the fundamental principles of the ILO, including freedom of association and collective bargaining. But the West have distorted it. That's what they are trying to do now. And saying, how can you accuse us of not being committed when we are voting with our pockets in terms of supporting the organization? They have these programs now. And with that, the politics behind who gets appointed to what position in the ILO among the civil servants. So they are committed in that, but it's a very kind of tricky kind of situation, and it's very similar to the position that they take in the WHO, the WIPO, and all the UN agencies they are in. For them, I think. You see, Professor Wilson, the thing with that, the little thing I've learned with trying to understand China a bit, they are a very complicated society. Because here's a society, I mentioned this before, they have been a civilization for 5,000 years. Every time revolution, they don't think in decades. And this is not, they have got a very much kind of longer time view of the world than the West or any other people have. So for them, I think it's that once you, and it's the same thing. I mean, in Africa now, there's a lot of debate about their role. And in fact, just as a matter of interest, I was participating yesterday for 5 hours in a conference of the Sino Africa Law Deans Conference, which I initially, when I was dean, I hosted the first one in Cape Town, but this time it was virtual, and there were about 60 people who attended that, and they reminded the Africans, so to speak, because and they said, look, China's commitment to Africa goes beyond what you are accusing us now. Way back when, and they mentioned South Africa, when nobody thought that South Africa would be free, China gave their solidarity to the African people. And all what we are doing now is trying to help you develop. That's their line. The line that, you know, they are not here just to, and whether that is true is very debatable now. As I keep saying, there's a lot of debate in Africa now about their role. I don't know in Brazil. Maybe Brazil is too big, but definitely in Africa now. Because one of the things, if we may go back to the issue of employment, once the Chinese have got a concession in any African country, first of all, they try to bring as many of their employees as possible, including drivers and what, you know, they want to be sort of self-sufficient. And unlike the Western management system, I think the managers in China saw their hands. They tend to work, you know, alongside with the other workers. I mean, there's a story that I can share with you. It's probably exaggerated, and this story is from Namibia. It was some construction, big construction, concerning the ports in Wafish Bay, that the Chinese were given to construct. And then the Namibian government, quite rightly, insisted that a certain percentage of workers on that project should be Namibian. And the Chinese reluctantly agreed. So the story goes. And within 6 weeks, all the Namibians had deserted, most of them. And so the Chinese company went to the government. You gave us a timeline. Do you want us to finish this project or not? And of course, the government had no answer to that. They allowed them. And within that time, they finished the project. Why? Because of what we are talking about here, in terms of labor rights and all rest and all that, that doesn't exist in terms of their working methods. They work themselves very, very hard. They are very hard-working people. And for them, everything now is for the party. And you know, the other thing, if you were to think of this, the system that they are using now, for all intents and purposes, this is a state-led market economy. You know, they now glorify, you know, billionaires as long as, you know, they are celebrated by the party. But that's one end. The other end, the controls are still in place. They do control. Okay, there have been occasional kind of rebellions, but you see, the Chinese Communist Party has always claimed, and with good reason, that the party understands Chinese mentality and culture. The Chinese are a collective. To be a dissident in China, never mind about the very efficient state apparatus, you've got to overcome your own family because they think as a collective. You know, something very similar, but much more intense than the African Ubuntu. This is for real. Yeah. And I think also in Japan to a certain extent. And this is for real. You don't disagree and be a dissident. You are going to shame your family and beyond that. And this is what I told the Director General of the WAT when he complained, where he could find 32, you know, missing people. I said, the People's Republic of China has got the most efficient administrative system. I'm sure you'll find them. They will. They know where everybody is. It's such a controlled system, and it's collective. So they make the best of that. But some scholars have suggested that sooner or later, these contradictions within the system will catch up with them. But my sense is that it will take much longer than any other society before that happens. It could be. I don't know. It could be. Can you foresee a Soviet Union kind of implosion in China? Is that possible? I don't know. It could be. So China is a very complex case, yeah.
In comparison to the commitment with China related to ILO, and I mean, in a general view to social justice, how would you interpret it, the United States position currently? To what extent do you believe, do you feel that the United States keeps being committed with social justice broadly and specifically with the ILO?
Yeah, definitely not, and I think this is not with the ILO. There's been a drastic wind of change. I mean, this has been happening. I mean, as far as I've been associated with the ILO since the early 80s, and then I've seen a kind of a drift during the Cold War period. You might remember that the US left the ILO. And they only came back in 1987, I think. After a few years, they patched it up. And ever since, I think their commitment to all UN organizations, some, better than others. I mean, the ILO, if you look at the appointment system in the ILO, you must always have, there are certain positions there that have got to be American. And they pay for most of it. And the sort of, there is that feeling that, the UN in particular, agencies like the ILO and now the WHO, they don't matter. They don't want to have anything to do. They want to go it alone. And this is the clear impression. It's only the Europeans that I think are more behind this, because they see, I mean, I think in fairness, a lot of this system, they were European creation, even though the Americans under Wilson played the father figure, but there was never that kind of commitment to the extent that the Europeans have. So their commitment to the ILO is very local, and it will be interesting now. It's about Guy Ryder is about to be replaced. It will be interesting what will happen, who is going to be appointed. Because they always, regardless of who is Director General, one of the three Deputy Director General, usually the more powerful policy is always American. And the Chinese now want to have one of their own there. So it's very, but in terms of commitment, my sense is that it's at best lukewarm. As for China, Professor Wilson, I think they are committed, but with an agenda in mind. Does the ILO need them? Yes, the ILO needs the Chinese. Because its programs, increasingly, I think the Scandinavian commitment, it hasn't sort of gone to the dogs, as it were, but it's much more so, and they have got less cash to spare. So the China is the next best kind of donor. But what does that mean for the organization? That's the big question, yes. So I see interesting times ahead.
Yeah.
Yes, next slide, please. Yes, sure. Professor Antonio, you are saying.
By the moment, they are investing in Brazil, but they really don't. They really know very few about our labor relations, about our labor law. we have a cultural shock sometimes when we research about Chinese companies, but they are trying to understand more than in the past. On the same, it's happening on the Latin America also. And we are very diverse. We are very different from them, but they are trying. It's so shy. They are shy in these terms, in academic terms, I guess. They are really beginning this effort by now. They are investing in this. They are investing to be more closer at Latin American university, to understand more about our labor market, to understand more about our society. But what I'm thinking is, it's unavoidable. We needed to understand what they do, what they need, what they want.
You have got no choice.
It's clear, because we need them for the future in this sense.
Yeah, I mean, you are definitely right. I mean, we've got the world at large has got no option. Even the Americans understand that now. I think, in spite of whatever they do, I mean, you have seen how the Chinese own the American debt. You remember when they were setting up? I mean, they thought everybody the Chinese were mad when those mortgage houses were folding up. The Chinese went and bought everything, so they have got that debt. It sounds as if it's a joke, but it's true. So you see, the thing about China, they can't afford America not to be a going concern. So they are not going to pull the rug from their feet. They will allow America to go on because they have got too much at stake. That's my interpretation. They will allow America to go on. But the Americans, I think, as they would use their own words, they are kidding themselves if they think they are going to get the better of China. I don't think so. It's a very complex society. And you are right. I mean, sort of, it's just that the language is a barrier. But once you get a glimpse of what's happening there, such an interesting, in terms of labor law, for instance, social protection, the kind of things they're doing about the elderly. My wife is a geriatrician. She's a doctor who specializes in the medicine of the elderly, and the kind of things they're doing there with an aging population, because now they have figured out, like everywhere else, particularly in Western Europe, what they have relaxed, for instance, the one-child policy. And they have not done that easily, because they have figured out that by 2025 or 2030, they'll be short of labor. Can you imagine? When you see China there, can you imagine that they would ever be short of labor? But actually they will. So they are relaxing the policy to have more children to be able to have labor. That's Chinese thinking. It doesn't occur to anybody. I mean, so I said, my God, I mean, China succeeded by containing the population. What are they doing now? They are relaxing it because they will need more labor because of an aging population. And what they are doing in terms of social protection, sort of is admirable. So in terms of social justice, I think they are trying. On their own terms, of course, but they are trying better than most.
It's an enormous challenge for them in this sense.
Yes.
And there is strange things there for us in Brazil, because they had a kind of green card.
Yes.
And in Chinese they call hukou. It's a kind of green card.
Yes.
If you don't have this green card, it's impossible to move from the country, countryside, to the shore, for example.
Yes, exactly.
They really control the labor market in this sense.
They do. It's true. They do.
Okay.
So it's very interesting. I think we should all learn Chinese, but it's such a difficult language. I only know about 12 characters, including my own Chinese name.
Professor, it's necessary 2 lives for us. To understand Chinese, to learn about Chinese, 2 lives. 2 lives.
Yeah, 2 lives, yes, yes. And you know, to be proficient in Chinese, you need to have about 4,000 characters. To master about 4,000 characters. But you know, it's an interesting, yeah, it's a very interesting place. Victor, can you go to the next one, please?
Professor,
No.
yes.
Yes, please.
Yes. Hi. Regarding this different point of views about China and the US, what's your interpretation about Brazilian role? It has changed in the past 5 years because our society has changed. So, do you feel we are diverse now? We changed in terms of social justice or commitment to ILO?
I'm not sure about that. First of all, I don't know enough. I hardly know anything about what's happening in Brazil right now. My view of Brazil is a BRICS kind of view. And that, you know, Brazil, I think, was crucial in getting this BRICS off ground. I mean, for a change, what was happening about BRICS? It wouldn't have happened without Brazil in terms of getting that. I'm not sure what's happening there, but from the ILO's point of view, definitely in terms of the cases that come before us, the Committee on Freedom of Association, Brazil is not unique. You have got problems that come, and then we are still on talking terms. So, and in fact, I have dealt with your ambassador. I don't know whether they have recalled him. He was the chair of the group, and they have these groups. The market economies have got their own. The Latin America and Caribbean, the Africans have got their own. The Asians have got their own. And normally they act as the pressure groups in terms of their interests. So I dealt with the Brazilian ambassador, a very kind of sort of becoming gentleman. So sort of we did not have to use an interpreter because he speaks wonderful English. And my sense of him, one of the things that he pointed out to me, and this is what I've tried to tell you, it was him, among others, who said, look, you'll be making a mistake if you treat Latin America as the sort of simply, it's a diverse region. And he pointed out to me in terms of this diversity in terms of the cultural and social setting. You have got similar histories, but they are not identical. And he said this to me, and I agreed because I've heard that from other people as well. That if you look, say, take Guatemala, you know, sort of Venezuela, not to mention Cuba or Haiti, these are very different countries, very different from Brazil, very different from Argentina and all that. So I don't know what's happening in Brazil, other than the international setup now seems to suggest that you are now closer to the Americans than you were before. But you know, you have got your own kind of sort of dynamics. So, but in terms of where I'm sitting, in terms of the ILO, I don't think Brazil is unique in the sort of freedom of association kind of problems that you have. You know, and what is more encouraging from my point of view is that other than the sort of the occasional kind of fatality, you don't have the kind of violence unless you hide it when you come to the ILO. You don't have the kind of violence I've got to deal with in Colombia or Guatemala. You know, those are really, or not to mention, you know, Iran or Pakistan. So you have, you find, I mean, you have a sense, yeah, I have a sense of Brazil, you know, regardless of, as I said, you are a much bigger country than South Africa. South Africa is, but you have the same similar characteristics of diversity. You know, diversity is not easy to manage, but you know,
inequalities.
yeah,
Poverty,
yeah. Yes,
unfortunately.
but more than that, I think when I talk of diversity, I'm talking of Sao Paulo, the state of Sao Paulo, for instance. I was reading on it, and I was struck by how diverse the background of your population is. You know, in terms of the roots and all that. So you are diverse apart from the inequality and what. There is also a cultural diversity within a traditional diversity within yourselves, and that I think, maybe I'm being naive, will probably see you through the future in a sense, because by definition, you have got to accommodate each other somehow. That's my naive interpretation. I'm not sure it's necessarily true, but that's my. You have to find a way of living with each other, one or the other. And now, friends, please allow me to make a personal appeal. And Professor Antonio and Victor probably remember. Is Anna with us today?
No, unfortunately, she couldn't join us. And
She can't join us. Yeah. You probably remember my story. 7 years ago, almost 8 years ago, in 2012, my heart failed completely. I woke up and then sort of I had a stroke before, and you know, sort of I was lucky because my wife is a medical doctor. She's my personal physician. So I was lucky, rushed to hospital, and eventually they found that my heart had completely failed. That was on the 12th of December, 2012. Luckily, by 19th of December, they had found a donor, a woman in another city. They don't tell you the names. And I had a heart transplant. So as I talk to you, I feel myself blessed, and I feel on a personal mission that whatever group I talk to, I always try to tell this story, you know, to encourage people to be organ donors, because the heart transplant now, and incidentally, I was operated on by 5 surgeons, and one of them, the most senior one, was an assistant during the first heart transplant. It was done in Cape Town, you know that, by Chris Barnard in 1967. And one of them, the most senior sort of surgeon on that team, was Chris Barnard, his assistant during the first. Is now in his 80s and still working. And 3 of the panel were also Chris Barnard's students. So I was lucky. I'm going into be 8 years in December. And I'm lucky to have this wonderful woman's heart. May her soul continue to rest in peace. And I would urge you, please, if you have not considered it, to consider being an organ transplant. It's not only, you don't have to die. There are other parts you can donate. And the heart transplant now is an easy operation. I mean, they have mastered the techniques. 6-7 hours later, you have got a new heart. They have patched it up. But what they are struggling is to find enough donors, and also the medication. I'm on 12 medications as I speak, but I function. I work quite well. It's not always. I don't think I'll be, and I'm quite old. I'm 68 years old. So I sort of, my father did not make it to 60. I think he died when he was 53, and it was the same kind of symptoms. So I'm lucky, and I owe it to my donor, I think, and that's a terrible time you can imagine when the family is mourning and they are generous enough to allow their loved one to live on. So I would really urge you to please consider it. You don't have to be dead, but if you are, if it reaches that, what we are trying to fight here is that in the US, I don't know about Brazil, you can opt in. Here we are still trying to fight for opting in, and the terrible thing in South Africa is that culturally and in terms of religion, they are very taboo. For instance, among most Africans and Black people, among the Muslims, for instance, and all that, So what we have here is not mostly the white population, but even among them is the middle class, the what don't believe in that. So please consider it. And I've put, I don't know whether Victor, can they see the Brazilian Organ Transplant Association? And I'm sorry, Muito obrigado. Obrigado. It's not obraga. There's a door missing. Please. So, Professor Antonio, my colleagues, friends, Victor, Enrique and the others, Paulo, I think, and all that. And it's been wonderful to have this opportunity. I really appreciate it. And I hope next time, Professor Antonio, Victor, and the others, Professor Wilson, I hope to see you in Cape Town one of these days. And this is the best time to come, huh? Between October and Easter. It's paradise on earth. The weather is improving. It's wonderful to be here. But come after the COVID, please.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed my conversation with you. Professor Antonio,
Professor,
thank you. And also Anna and Paulo and Enrique, where is he? I can't see him. He's sort of there. Thank you, Paulo. I can see him there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It was an honor to have you here with us.
Professor Evance, I have not words enough to express all my gratitude and recognition for your generosity to join us in this 5 different meetings, and so enriching and so delightful. So thank you so much. We are very proud to be able to be in touch with you and to benefit from your classes, from your lectures. So beautiful, so enriching, as I said. I also, Professor Wilson is one of the organizers from the business school.
Okay. Hi,
again.
Hi, Professor. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you.
And we really hope that for the next time we will be in presential way.
Yeah.
As in a Brazilian way, we will embrace you. Okay.
Thank you. It would be nice to come back to Sao Paulo. I've been there several times, but in and out. Not
in the name of my students and my school, very thank you for your knowledge, for your gentle kindness with us. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, my friends. Okay.
Also, Professor Jorge from the Mackenzie University.
Bye.
I just want to thank Professor Kalula for his extremely interesting lessons, and to say that I hope we can welcome you again in São Paulo soon.
Next time, face to face.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much, my friends. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. Bye. Obrigado. Yeah. Thank you.